If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is Bruce Maguire.
And Massive Powers.
And you are listening to the Maura Murray series. We are on episode 37, A New Theory. So I am going to propose a theory that is going to attempt to make all the pieces fit in this puzzling case, the likes of which true crime has not seen. Once again, if you like the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you like the podcast, hit the like button. Feel free to share it across social media platforms. You can also check us out, Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and Patreon. And patrons do get a priority for case or subject requests, as well as podcast hosts, as we have a slew of podcasters who contribute to Mindshock. All right, Maxwell, so you've been with us since episode 1 of the Maura Murray series. You know this case inside out, like the back of your hand. All the players, all the different theories, all of the scenarios. Have you been able to come up with a theory that accounts for all the anomalies, inconsistencies, and coincidences that you just don't see in missing persons cases other than this case for some reason?
No, not really. I mean, I can't really just. I mean, I don't know. I have my go-to with the trafficking.
Human trafficking? Yeah, you have been saying that since the beginning. I think that has been your go-to. But you never really answered who trafficked her. Do you believe the police trafficked her? Someone involved with the police? One bad cop and his buddies? Or the entire department's involved in the trafficking? Or was it someone who's maybe a friend of a police officer that just wasn't looked at as closely as they should have been?
I'm thinking it's random, like some trafficking dude saw a girl in a car. She looks innocent and just took her.
So how do you explain the bizarre, inconsistent, and downright anomalous actions of the Haverhill Police Department? Do you just chalk it up to pure incompetence?
Incompetence, miscommunications between people, and just basic human errors. I don't know.
So you believe the whole cover-up is just to cover up their incompetence, not their complicity in whatever happened to Maura Murray?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Okay, very interesting. I know a lot of people share that view. So here I am going to introduce the Maguire Theory, finally, to the Maura Murray case. I've been pretty stumped. It's been tough to make all of these connections, but after our last few podcasts, I think I have come up with something. I mean, bits and pieces of this theory I've mulled over on the podcast, but here for the first time, I will present the Maguire Theory. So, are you ready for this, Maxwell? This is quite mind-shocking.
Sure.
Okay. What if Cecil Smith thought that Jeff Williams, the police chief who normally drives around drunk according to local rumor, if Cecil thought that Jeff Williams hit Maura or was responsible in some way, like, for example, let's say Jeff Williams, now I've postulated this in the past before, if some of these police officers had nothing to do with Maura Murray going missing, but they're involved in illicit or shady activities otherwise, then that could explain their shady actions in general, because they could be involved in other illegal activities. They just didn't have anything to do with Maura, but that's why this whole department is run this particular way. So, if Cecil thought Williams was responsible, but he wasn't, if Maura really was driving in tandem, and either someone else picked her up, whatever, but Cecil didn't know that, so if Cecil covered it up because he thought Williams was responsible, and if all of the Haverhill PD went along with it, because how bad would it look if it came out that Cecil was covering for a drunk police chief, regardless of whether or not the drunk police chief had anything to do with Maura. Like, let's say later on down the line, they find out somehow that Jeff Williams wasn't involved, however way. Like, let's say they could have found that out and it was legitimate. So they found out Williams wasn't responsible. But what are they going to do now? Because think about it. Let's say Rick Forcier or Bruce McKay and Greg Floyd, like non-Haverhill people, or people from UMass. Let's say acquaintances or whoever.
Before you go on, was there any damage to Jeff Williams' car? Is that what you mean, like a collision with his car, like with Maura? Or
we actually did go over this in other podcasts. The 001 was coincidentally in repair. Yes. It was also allegedly, I mean, I'll get into this a little later in this podcast. I can go over it. But we don't have a confirm on that, Maxwell. So we don't know. Like everything in this case, there's very little definitive. But let me finish my Maguire theory. So think about it. If it's acquaintances from UMass, they were driving in tandem. Maybe they were responsible in some way, either whatever theory you want to go along with. She went to Canada to start a new life. She was harmed. There was an accident. Maybe they didn't mean to harm her, but she was harmed. She died. They didn't want to claim responsibility, so they covered it up. Or maybe something happened at the earlier accident. Regardless, if the weathered barn corner accident scene was indeed staged, maybe it was staged by Cecil. Maybe Haverhill PD assisted. Maybe even state police assisted because they thought Williams was responsible and they wanted to cover it up. However, none of them are guilty. But now what are they going to do? Because they can't come out now and say, oh, yeah, we staged the scene. But yeah, no, we're not responsible for what happened to Maura. Because if they thought Williams was responsible and they didn't want the aftermath of what that would entail, or whatever reason, let's say Williams intimidated Cecil. We don't know what's going on. If Cecil, had some kind of cognitive degenerative disease, neurological disease, they're taking advantage of Cecil. They scare him into going along with it. Maybe Cecil did think Williams was responsible. Maybe later Cecil finds out he wasn't responsible, but what's he going to do now? Is he going to cop to it? Is the cop going to cop to it? I mean, it seems like he couldn't because there's too much involved now, because everybody covered it up if they thought the police chief was responsible. Even if he wasn't, let's say he's not responsible, but they thought he was. And so they all go in to try to cover it all up. Does that account for all the inconsistencies? What do you think, Maxwell? What do you think?
It's pretty good. I mean, it can be aligned to the events, but I don't know. I don't know how else to.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some loose ends. So there was definitely still other things going on. Maybe Jeff Williams was involved in something else illegal, and that needs to be covered up. So that's intersecting, because if he was doing something else illegal that night, I mean, if something in the logs that's been removed, if that pertains to something other than Maura Murray going down, they could have covered that up because they need to cover up their other illegal activity. Nothing to do with Maura. But it looks like it does. We got to cover every angle on Mindshock, upturn every stone. So let's go a little deeper into this theory. So there are other police officers in Haverhill PD. So these other officers came on duty after midnight. So if we knew what they were driving, that would be interesting, because who had the 001 SUV? So apparently there was an SUV parked at Lavoie. And so if there was a mistaken SUV and they thought the other SUV was out of commission and it wasn't the one that was at the accident scene, if they have another SUV, who knows? So H3 and H6, which are the officer designations, they came on after midnight. So, and by the way, they've never given an interview. They've never come in, like, what's going on? If, let's say, all of the Haverhill PD, let's say they're shady. These particular officers are shady. Let's say, I don't want to say crooked cops, but let's say they're involved in illicit activities. Maybe not even anything that bad. Maybe really low-level illicit activity. Maybe they don't even hurt anybody. Maybe they skim something somewhere. Who knows? But something that just looks bad. Maybe not even necessarily illegal. They're all going to cover for each other no matter what, because they don't want that exposed. They don't want to look bad. So this whole thing spun out of control, and it's the cover-up that's making it look much worse than it is, and it doesn't even have anything to do with Maura. But that's why it looks bad. So Cecil was also still out after midnight. So if we actually got all these officers to sit down in one room, everybody needs a brain fingerprint scan. So if we had Williams, Monahan, and these other officers for the Haverhill Police Department, obviously the fire department members, and might as well throw in EMS just to see that everything adds up. We can kind of find out what was going on. One of the most insane theories, I think, from the get-go was a communal slang. Do you remember that theory back in the day? I think that was first brought. I think that might have been first suggested by some unscrupulous online bloggers. But do you remember that, Maxwell?
I remember something like that.
Yeah, because if the neighbors were in on it and the police were in it, and what's crazy, I actually did some research. There are a few instances of communal slangs throughout history. So if there are known ones, how many unknown ones are there?
I can see that in like small towns, like some leader, some cult leader will just get everyone involved, and whoever passes through that town will, sacrifice them.
Well, this is a small town. This is a small hamlet of Haverhill, New Hampshire.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I can see that happening.
So you think it's a possibility in this case?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, very interesting. So anyway, I don't know. I don't see that happening just because it's the amount of. I don't want to fall for fallacious reasoning here. I don't want to appeal to incredulity and say it just seems too outlandish. But the conflicting statements of a lot of the neighbors make it seem like it's unlikely they're all in on it. So if there was a small contingent, but then it wouldn't, I don't know if that would qualify for a communal slang because the entire community was not in on it. So, but again, do you believe it's telling that the other officers on duty that night were have remained silent this long? Do you find that strange? Because it seems a little strange. I mean, they have no comment at all at any of this in one of the biggest missing persons cases now in that area.
I don't find it strange. I'm a lot. Probably they're introverted and just they don't give a shit. I mean, they don't know enough about anything, so they're not gonna
They were on
comment.
duty. Yeah, but they were on duty that night. They at the very least they could have. Okay, in every other case, even if they don't want to say anything, usually they say, "Oh, well, Cecil was a good guy. I mean, I'm sure he followed protocol, like whatever the standard answers." But it seems like they've been gag ordered because there's not a peep. I mean, they don't even come out with the standard responses. We're like, oh, it's being investigated. It'll definitely, if there was any wrongdoing, it'll be uncovered. There's official investigate. Like, there's nothing, not even the textbook.
Actually, even with like mainstream, like other mainstream news about like missing cases, and I don't see a lot of cops coming forward and like being interviewed and stuff. Like I only see like the main people involved. Like they don't step forward. They don't go
Whenever,
in the news.
yeah, they do. Whenever there's allegations of police corruption, there are usually fellow officers who chime in that either say, oh, well, the police department's taking care of it. Or if they're a friend of the officer, they say, oh, no, I've known him for a long time. He's up and up by the book. I have no doubt he'll be cleared. I mean, there are these textbook vanilla answers that they happen all the time anytime there's a question of corruption.
Maybe I just don't watch enough TV.
Yeah, that's definitely it. Or no, maybe you saw it, but you can't remember it because of Maxwell Army.
I don't know. I just don't see it like that. I just kind of, yeah, I just don't see a lot of police officers get involved with, because they have enough shit to worry about. I don't know.
In a small town where there's nothing to do? I mean, so we're talking about Byron Charles and Cashin here, and a lot of the stuff has been omitted from the police logs. So you don't find that strange at all. So you think logs are just edited all the time, every night, to remove information for what purpose?
I don't know.
Because when Cecil Smith was at the Weathered Barn corner, H6 was listed in the logs as filling in for Cecil. So Cashin or Charles could have been in SUV 001, Martin Cashin and Byron Charles. So they were both on the logs after midnight. So which vehicles were they driving? Like, why is it so hard to nail down all this information? Why is Haverhill PD so silent about this? I mean, how could it hurt to say what they were driving unless they're trying to cover up something? Like, I know you don't find anything weird. You don't make any kind of deductions about anything, but think about it. If there's nothing to cover up, because the truth is not afraid of investigations, how could it hurt to say what vehicle they were in? Even if they're lying, the fact that they haven't issued any statement at all, it's like they're afraid of being caught lying, so they say nothing at all. But if they're not lying, why would they be afraid of being caught lying?
I mean, what if they had? Let's say if they had nothing to do with it, like they would say something like, "Oh, I was at this street at this time," that kind of thing.
Of course.
And they won't even say that. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, well, they won't say anything at all about anything. Like not even like, oh, we were on duty that night. It was an uneventful night. Cecil handled the crime scene. It's being handled. If there's anything fishy, it'll be uncovered. Even some kind of vanilla statement like that. But the silence is deafening here. I mean, we have silence at UMass. We have silence in Haverhill. All of this obfuscation, redirection, and flat out lying all over the place. Like, I believe that's very fishy. What could account for that?
Or it could be they were with a hooker cheating on their wife, or
See, now you're getting somewhere. There are we actually went over local rumors like that, actually involving some of the officers, where they were involved in some kind of indiscretions, and that's why they don't want to say anything. That's a good point, Maxwell. That's what I was saying earlier. If there are some kind of things that make them look bad, they could be looking like they're covering up something that happened to Maura that had nothing to do with Maura Murray.
yeah.
That's a good point. So, and of course, Jeff Williams officially is off duty at this time. Now, here's the other thing that we don't know about. What if Jeff Williams is responsible for either a hit and run or some other drunk driving incidents that we don't know about, but Cecil Smith did know about? What if Cecil Smith got freaked out when he heard something on the scan and he thought Jeff Williams, as I said before, either there was a hit and run on Maura or something, he thought he was responsible and he wanted to control the scene to kind of contain it. And that's why he made it look like a drunk driver if he was spraying all the wine around. I mean, we went over this on our staged accident podcast. If you haven't checked that out, check that out. We dropped some bombshells, some mind shocks on that episode, including, I will reiterate here, the biggest mind shock of them all, possibly so far. Monahan stated that he was listening to Faith Westman's call live on the radio, on the police radio, and she stated that, and the lights were there already. So before Cecil, so the call that Cecil was responding to, she was hanging up when the vehicle arrived. So that was at the exact second Cecil was being notified, or the minute he was being notified. That means another vehicle was there with its lights on. Now, again, if Maura Murray was already gone from the scene, this has nothing to do with Maura Murray, but it could have been another officer, and they're covering all of this up because Cecil might have thought Williams was responsible even when he wasn't. And this is all the big cover-up from there. Any thoughts on that, Maxwell?
I missed what you said. A couple sentences.
Maxwell Army. I just reiterated the biggest mind shock on this whole series. Possibly the biggest one. Monahan said he heard Faith Westman's 911 call live on the police radio as he was responding that she was hanging up when another vehicle already arrived at the scene. This was at 7:27 to 7:29. So this is before Cecil was called out, or right as Cecil was responding to the 911 call. So he didn't get there yet. So whoever was there with the lights on, it wasn't Cecil. And Monahan confirmed this.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
So that's the biggest mind shock so far. So again, what I just said is that officer on the scene, whoever it was, they might have not had anything to do with Maura Murray going missing anyway, because if Maura went missing from the previous accident a half an hour earlier, she's not there anyway. But Cecil might not necessarily know that. So if Cecil thinks that Williams kidnapped her or whatever, maybe Williams kidnapped somebody else sometime, or it was a rumor that he did, and Cecil was worried that he did it again. So Cecil wanted to cover up and contain the situation, possibly, or was threatened into it. Or a different officer, whoever was the first arriving officer, they staged the scene first before Cecil even got there. So they were spraying around the wine or splattering the wine or whatever, because that doesn't add up, to make it look like a drunk driver so nobody would suspect Jeff Williams.
Ah, I see.
And then, of course, Monahan stopped by. He talked to Cecil, and this was all covered up for quite some time before it was admitted. So that's kind of strange as well. So once again, Art asked what Cecil was driving with Monahan, and he asked him if he was driving the sedan. Monahan responded, "I believe he was." He said something like, "That's not something I'm 100% on or whatever," but he believes that he was in the Crown Vic that evening. So very, very interesting. This was in the transcript, and obviously they didn't air this on the Oxygen show because that was a narrative steering operation. So just to round this all out, we don't know what Byron Charles and Martin Cashin were doing that night. Not the whole night. And they don't give interviews, so that's a bit strange. You don't find that strange.
Which part?
What I just said. You don't find it strange that they've never made a statement about anything.
Oh yeah. Uh, yeah, I find it strange a little bit after you explained it, because I always think, people are just not interested. But that's you made some good points, so it is kind of strange.
Yeah, and the only other thing interesting, the following day, February 10th, Officer Cashin noted a suspicious person on Central Street. No contact was made. So that's kind of interesting as well, because no contact was made. So he just, normally when they make a note that someone is suspicious, I mean, that warrants, they might just ask him a couple questions or whatnot. But he notices someone suspicious and doesn't do anything about it. Like, he doesn't, I mean, I don't know. That's kind of weird to just be listed like that. So, a little weird. There's other strange activity that we will get into, but in the next episode, we'll be going back to UMass because there's a lot of unanswered questions there, of course. Also, the Hanover logs, I mean, there's inconsistencies in all these logs. I mean, there's just sections missing. So the other thing that's a little bizarre we haven't talked about, so he has a patrol, so Monahan apparently had a patrol partner. I believe that's Brian Doyle. So Monahan supposedly was going to meet Brian Doyle at the time he heard about this accident scene on the radio. So he mentioned, so Art actually asked him, did your patrol partner do anything? Did you guys put out like an area bolo or something like that? Monahan responded, no, because it wasn't our call. We were just there. So is this a Freudian slip? Who else was there? Because if he's there with Cecil, he's not going to say we with Cecil because Monahan's not Haverhill PD. Do you find that strange at all or no?
Can you explain that again?
Okay, so Monahan, as far as we know, Monahan was alone when he responded to the scene, right?
Yeah.
Art Roderick asks him, did your patrol partner do anything? Did you guys put out like an area bolo, be on the lookout, or something like that? Monahan responds, no, because it wasn't our call. We were just there. Like, is that a Freudian slip? What does he mean by we if he's supposed to be there alone? Because he's not going to say we representing himself and Cecil, because Cecil Haverhill, Cecil can put out the bolo.
Just where though? Like the accident scene? Or we were just...
Yeah, he's talking about the accident scene, yeah.
Why would we put a bolo? We were just there.
Well, he said it wasn't his call because it's not his jurisdiction. That's Haverhill PD. But why is he saying we? He could have said I was just there. Unless, why is Art asking about the patrol partner anyway? We don't. I mean, we really. I mean, this whole thing is a little bit bizarre. But the official story, Monahan's saying he's on his way. He's on his way to meet his patrol partner when he hears on the radio about the accident scene. So he goes to the scene instead. So the other inconsistency here is Cecil also added in the report ADV partner working on. So he's basically saying there might have been another individual there? And why are there so many people responding to a standard spin out? Like, why is state police Monahan? So there's no injury reported. All right, like let's dissect this a little bit further. There's no injury reported on the scene, and we have state police coming. We have Cecil coming. We have other people coming. There's a whole lot of people that seem to be responding to a standard spin out where the driver was supposedly fine. There was activity at the trunk. There was the man smoking a cigarette. I mean, this seems like it could be handled by one officer. Why are all these people coming to the scene?
I don't know.
I mean, if it's a standard spin out or even a standard drunk driver abandoning their vehicle, you need 5 police officers there to look at the vehicle to just
Well, I'm thinking a lot of times police officers aren't busy, so they call everybody.
But
It's like I always see it in town, like like someone gets pulled over and there's like,
But they were busy. So there were snowmobiles being ticketed.
oh yeah, there's a lot of suicide calls, right?
Yeah, there was a ton of suicide. So it seems like were the suicide calls being called in to cover something up? See, that's something that always stuck out to me. We really need better statistics on the average suicide calls per night, but it seems like it was just a very unusually high number. And then also keep in mind, we have DEA activity in the area. We have some possible DEA FBI agents in the area with vehicles. We have the US Marshals showing interest in the area all that night. I mean, you don't find that suspicious, Maxwell?
I don't know, a little bit. It's kind of weird.
Everything let me
happened
rephrase the question for Maxwell. What would it take for you to be suspicious? Like if they had tanks wandering around, you probably still wouldn't find that suspicious, right? I mean, if there were foreign troops that just happened to be in Haverhill, if there was a bunch of CIA agents, that you probably still wouldn't find it suspicious, right? Because you don't find anything weird. All right, so yeah, you wouldn't find it suspicious no matter what. So nothing would make you find it suspicious. All right, got it.
Well, it happened. It happened within the 3 hours. All this DAA stuff, right?
Everything happened that night. Yeah.
Yeah.
You find nothing suspicious. All right. So.
Well, I don't know what to think of it. I guess if there's like a conspiracy to sacrifice one girl to the goat gods or some shit. I don't know. I guess.
But still, no. You guess. It's still not really that suspicious, right?
Because I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's that there's an event that happened that made DEA crazy and shit. I don't know. Like maybe. I don't know. I mean,
what if the Men in Black were in town that night and there was a supposed flying saucer crash? You probably still think that was just business as usual. That's nothing to see here, right?
Yeah, UFO can crash at the same night, so
nothing suspicious. All right, gotcha, Maxwell. Gotcha. All right. So the only thing that's left loose here, which I will address. So I mean, I've read numerous books on true crime, detective investigations. I've watched countless documentaries. So basically, the common theme I see that a lot of investigators mention in that in every single case, there is usually one odd coincidence or one major piece that doesn't fit. And that's normal because there are so many variables in people's lives that these non-fitting pieces actually don't have anything to do with the solving the crime. So it's theoretically possible that if someone from UMass was responsible, possibly with connections to UMass PD or Amherst PD or CI connections, then that could explain that angle. And if Cecil was covering up for a crime he thought Williams committed, even if Williams didn't, and that whole thing just snowballed because obviously that could never be admitted after the fact. So that accounts for almost everything. So the main piece that doesn't fit is the FBI, DEA, US Marshal involvement in the area that night. And of course, the unusual amount of suicide calls we just mentioned before. But if it's an unrelated case that just happened to be unfolding in the same general area, is that our one coincidence that doesn't fit? Because if Billy simply knew where she was heading, possibly with whom, And for other reasons that he doesn't want to talk about, it could explain all of his behavior as well.
What's the strategy behind the suicide calls? Let's say there is some kind of organized conspiracy, whatever. Like, what is what is the idea behind getting people to call in suicide calls?
So if you're trying to get, so a small town is only going to have a certain amount of police officers. So it's kind of like the same thing when bank robbers or whatnot, like sometimes they'll blow up a car on the other side of town, so then all the police go over there. So it's
Yeah.
kind of similar to that. If you're in a small town, there's only a few officers. If there's a couple of suicide calls spread out away from the accident scene that you're staging, you call out the suicide call, so a police officer has to respond to all those calls.
Oh, I see now. Because you know what I was thinking? I was thinking of the whole police department in unison about the whole conspiracy. So, like, to me, it didn't make sense to make suicide calls and shit. But I can see how it can work with like a three-person conspiracy in the police department.
Yeah, you don't need everybody in on it. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
one officer.
Then the suicide calls would make sense to distract all the other
Well,
officers
also,
too.
it doesn't have to be something well thought out, because the one common theme that the one common issue people have with the staged accident, why would they stage it there? But that's logically fallacious, because you're assuming they weren't trying to stage it elsewhere. Like if it was being towed into the wilderness where nobody would ever find it, or into let's say a Loon Mountain parking lot, a gigantic parking lot where it wouldn't be noticed for several days.
So it was like it could like that whole accident scene could have been like just a mishap on the
Right, and then they had to make
previous conspiracy
yeah,
plan or
they
whatever.
had to make do. Yeah. So for some reason, people just can't. I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like that's that hard to understand. You have a certain plan you're executing. If the plan goes wrong, you make do the best you can. Nobody's saying it was premeditated to be staged in front of the Westmans. I haven't heard that theory. It, for whatever reason, that's where it ended up being staged. But if it was being towed and something went wrong, they staged it. But similarly with the suicide calls, let's say the people covering this up, let's say one of the calls was legit. Somebody listening could have been like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's call in two more. Like they could have thought of that. That could have been an impromptu in the moment, like improv. They could have improv that, you know? Because if they're like,
Gotcha.
wait, oh, there's a suicide call. Now that officer's responding. Wait a second. There's only one or two or more on duty. Let's call in one more somewhere else. If that was if that was how they
Gotcha.
were thinking, or if they're drunk. Like we really don't know what happened. That's the thing with being logically fallacious. You don't know the outcome. If the responsible parties are drunk and they can't think clearly, because obviously it looks suspicious if you're calling in multiple suicide calls. But if you're drunk, you're not going to think it looks suspicious, because if you hear a suicide call come in, that's the only thing on your mind. You'd be like, "Oh, let me call in one or two more." You're not going to be logically thinking, "Oh, wait a second, this is going to look suspicious tomorrow." And then, of course, Jeff Williams does call in to the following morning, and he wants to know what's going on with the dispatch records. So, I mean, there's so many things that don't add up here, because if Jeff Williams found out that Cecil was trying to cover for him because Cecil thought that Williams was responsible for whatever happened to Maura, that would make sense, because then Williams is not going to want to look bad. And he's going to be like, wait, because if he really was driving around drunk, even if he had nothing to do with Maura, he doesn't want that out there either. So it's like there's almost like this mutual. I mean, I think George Carlin said this: you don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge. So when you have certain individuals that all want the same thing, they don't need to have secret meetings and make a formal conspiracy. They're just going to want to not, they just going to want certain things not looked at. They might be individually covering up certain things so it's not looked out closely without even being in close communication with each other. And you see this in a lot of conspiracies too. Now, obviously, the cognitive dissonant and the illogical they won't be able to seriously consider that, because, they just appeal to incredulity. Too many people would have to be in on it, or whatever. There's a grand conspiracy that's too unlikely, or whatever their rationale is to soothe their dissonance. But it happens all the time, when there's people don't want to look bad. So when they have common interests and no formal conspiracy, but they individually do their part to keep things hush hush. And that's maybe what we have here. What do you think?
Yeah, looks good.
So once again, not a perfect theory. There's no perfect theory, but as I stated earlier, almost every case has that one thing that doesn't add up. Now, in this one, we seem to have a couple because we still have the Patrick Vassy hit and run. I mean, there's some loose ends, and we will be going back to UMass. In the next episode, we will be examining more issues with UMass, and then there's plenty more to uncover in Haverhill as well. So I just wanted to present this new theory where the police might not be responsible, but one or more than one parties of the police might have thought that a police officer was responsible, and that's what led to this incredible snowballing effect of cover-up that just looks really, really bad with inconsistencies, obfuscation. Because once again, the truth is not afraid of investigation, and they wouldn't want it found out that certain officers were trying to cover for a police officer or Jeff Williams, even if Williams was not responsible, because that just looks bad, even if he wasn't. So once again, we hope we left you with plenty to ponder in this very, very mysterious and baffling missing persons cold case. If you like the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you like the podcast, hit the like button. Feel free to share it across social media platforms. Questions, comments, critiques, theories, rebuttals. Just leave them in the comments section. You could also check us out. Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, Patreon. This is Bruce Maguire signing off.
And Maxwell Powers.
We'll catch you guys next time.